On the 20th of September 2021, Prague police opens the door of an ordinary bathroom and encounters a scene that is almost impossible to believe. On the cold tiled floor lies 23-year-old Christina Novakova. She is severely emaciated, barely reacts to people around her, but most importantly, she is alive. And there would be nothing special about this, if not for one circumstance. Christina had not left this room for almost 4 years. At first glance, the room does not differ from typical bathrooms that can be seen in any apartment. Bathtub, tiles on the floor, shower, small window at the top and a door locked from the inside. Only this door is unusual. It is equipped with a lock that can only be opened from the outside using a special screwdriver. In other words, being inside, it is almost impossible to get out independently. When forensic experts examine the room, on the floor they find 3 empty packages of antipsychotic medications issued in 2017. 4 years, exactly how long, presumably, Christina spent here. The humidity in the room was constantly high, which is confirmed by her palms and feet. They have serious damage from prolonged exposure to water and dampness. Christina's parents, engineer Martin Novak and his wife Eva, meet the police calmly. They immediately report that their daughter is in the bathroom voluntarily. Moreover, the mother assures investigators that such a strange decision is a psychiatrist's recommendation. But the parents cannot provide any medical documents or prescriptions confirming this. Police suspicions immediately fall on the parents. The first and most obvious suspect is the father, Martin Novak. He is an engineer, a technical specialist who is well versed in tools and can easily handle locks of this type. It is he who shows the police how the door mechanism works and emphasizes: opening it from inside is impossible if a special tool is not applied from outside. According to the father, the last time he opened the door was a week ago, after which Christina allegedly closed herself inside again. The mother, Eva Novakova, appears composed and calm. She willingly answers investigators' questions and confidently repeats: Christina closed herself and refused to come out. Eva claims that she fed her daughter by pushing food under the door. In recent days, Christina allegedly refused to eat, which worsened her condition. But why the mother did not seek medical help, she could not explain. The Novakov family's neighbor, Zuzana Kovachova, enters the scene. She tells police that she heard Christina asking for help at night several times. Moreover, according to her words, this always happened when only the father was in the apartment besides the daughter. The neighbor even claims that the mother was absent from home at such moments, often spending nights at her relatives. However, when police check these testimonies, they are not confirmed by other neighbors. It turns out that no one except Zuzana heard any strange cries and pleas for help. The investigation decides not to focus on the neighbor's version. So far, these are only words that are not confirmed by facts. Meanwhile, forensic experts make an unexpected discovery. Forensic medical examination shows that Christina last ate less than 36 hours ago, but the father claims that the bathroom door had been locked for a week already. Someone is clearly not telling the truth. Someone from the parents opened the door quite recently and left food there. But who and why is hiding this? The day after police found Christina in the bathroom, operatives began closely checking all details of that morning. After all, someone definitely was not telling the whole truth. Special interest was aroused by the father, Martin Novak. Outwardly, he held himself confidently, almost indifferently, like a person for whom a police visit is simply a minor domestic inconvenience. However, some moments in his behavior immediately alerted the investigation. Early morning on the 20th of September, that very day when police broke into the bathroom, a neighbor's IP camera installed in the parking lot near the house captured unusual activity by Martin. He appeared in the frame at 5:12 in the morning on Sunday, although usually at this time he was always at home. Initially, there was nothing suspicious in the frame. The man simply came out of the entrance and headed to his car parked at the far corner of the parking lot. However, Martin's subsequent actions made the investigation look at this recording again and again. The footage clearly shows how Christina's father opens the trunk and rummages inside for a long time, obviously checking or rearranging something. At some point, the camera captures in close-up two details: a box of disposable medical gloves and a large construction hairdryer. These two items raised questions immediately. Police understood. An engineer can have any tools for his work, this is quite normal. But on Sunday morning, long before operatives came to him, this looks strange. Medical gloves could speak to many things. First of all, about an attempt to hide fingerprints. After all, everyone who has ever watched Crime Chronicles knows that gloves are used precisely when they don't want to leave traces. Police naturally immediately assumed exactly this. Martin had to explain himself to operatives just a few hours after the camera recording fell into police hands. To the question of why he might need a construction hairdryer early Sunday morning, Christina's father calmly answered that he was fixing wiring in the garage. Allegedly, it broke down the evening before and there simply was no other time for repairs. The answer sounded plausible, however, the investigation decided to double-check. They requested electricity bills for the garage to make sure there really were problems with wiring there. This question remained open and required additional verification. But the gloves still remained a mystery. Initially, operatives assumed that they would have traces of water or substance from the bathroom that could directly connect the father to Christina's story. However, laboratory analysis very quickly dispelled these expectations. The toxicologist expert, having received the results, reported that there were no traces of water or dampness from the bathroom on the gloves. The evidence was clean, and it seemed the version about the father's involvement in bathroom events could be discarded. However, instead of water, traces of a completely different substance were found on the gloves: epoxy resin. The appearance of epoxy on the gloves surprised even experienced operatives. After all, epoxy resin is not connected to the bathroom in any way, at least at first glance. Martin Novak did not comment on the appearance of this substance in any way, and investigators were not yet rushing to ask him this question directly. They understood that premature accusations could only complicate the case. The investigation began cautiously searching for traces of epoxy resin in the apartment and in Martin's personal belongings. Perhaps he was engaged in some project that is still unknown. Perhaps epoxy resin could lead the investigation to a completely different story that is not connected to Christina's confinement in any way. For now, all this remained within the framework of assumptions that police kept in strict secrecy. On the same day, operatives began studying Martin's personality in more detail. Neighbors characterized him as a closed but polite person. In the house, he did not participate in any scandals, was not noticed in strange behavior. At work, they spoke of him as a reliable professional who never was late and did not create problems. All this made his personality even more mysterious. What surprised the investigation most was how calmly Martin reacted to everything that was happening. There was no panic or confusion in his behavior. Rather, on the contrary, he displayed emphasized calmness, as if he knew that the police would not find anything serious. But the epoxy resin on the gloves was the only thing that did not yet fit into the overall picture. Where it came from and what relation it had to Martin, the police still had to find out. The investigation did not completely close his alibi, but also did not rush to accuse him prematurely. Martin had recorded presence in the parking lot from 5:12 to 5:54 in the morning. What happened after that had to be investigated separately. At this stage of the investigation, the operatives decided to take a closer look at the second suspect, Eva Novakova. It was now up to her to provide answers to questions that the investigation had not dared to ask her husband directly. After all, one of them was definitely involved in what was happening behind the bathroom door. To understand how Christina ended up locked in the bathroom for 4 years, we need to go back to August 2017. It was then that the very phrase that would much later become her parents' argument was first voiced. home isolation. During that period, Christina turned 19 years old. According to those around her, the girl's behavior began to change approximately 6 months before these events. Acquaintances noted that Christina became withdrawn and irritable, but no one could imagine that this would lead to such a radical decision on the part of her family. On the 5th of August 2017, the parents take Christina from the clinic of Dr. Marek Bencho, a psychiatrist well known in Prague. The discharge indicates that Christina suffers from schizoaffective disorder. Officially, this is diagnosis F25.1, which requires constant medical supervision. Dr. Bencho leaves a short but important recommendation: hospitalization during exacerbation. The parents receive the official conclusion and leave the clinic. But instead of following the doctor's advice and turning to a hospital at the first deterioration of her condition, the family makes an unexpected decision. Eva Novakova, Christina's mother, later explains to the police that they feared aggression. The family assured that the girl sometimes lost control, and they were afraid that the hospital would not provide her with proper care. Allegedly, the decision was made to control the situation themselves, without taking it beyond the family. The police, naturally, could not help but pay attention to such a decision. Home isolation of a person without official medical prescriptions and supervision of specialists is legally extremely questionable, and considering the further development of events, this looked more than strange. One of the first questions of the investigation was obvious. Could the family independently decide on such isolation without coordinating this with the attending physician? Especially since, as proof of the legitimacy of their actions, the parents referred precisely to the doctor's recommendation. The discharge from the clinic itself, which the family provided to the investigation, looked genuine. However, the investigation did not exclude that the doctor's signature could have been forged. In the practice of criminalists, such cases occurred more than once. To check this, the police requested a forensic handwriting examination of Dr. Bencho's signature. Meanwhile, operatives began questioning the family's circle. Among the family's acquaintances, no one confirmed that Christina displayed open aggression. On the contrary, the girl was known as a quiet, calm person. She never had conflicts at school or on the street. Friends described her as friendly and sensitive, though very withdrawn in the last year before isolation. Despite these contradictions, the parents continued to insist on their decision. Christina's mother claimed that it was the doctor who gave them to understand that in difficult situations, they could manage behavior at home. At the same time, what exactly the phrase manage behavior meant in the parents' understanding was not explained. Handwriting experts by this point had completed their work and transmitted the results to the investigation. Dr. Bencho's signature was absolutely genuine. This meant that the recommendation hospitalization during exacerbation really came from the doctor, and there was no crime in document forgery. It would seem that the version about falsification dismissed itself. However, legally the main question remained. Could this recommendation serve as justification for such harsh home isolation? Criminalists and lawyers involved in the case unanimously stated that a doctor's recommendation in such a situation does not free parents from responsibility. No medical conclusion can justify keeping an adult person in a closed space without regular medical supervision. Meanwhile, Dr. Bencho himself was outside the police's attention. The investigation consciously kept him away from public discussions and did not reveal details of his conversation with the Novikov family. No one suspected the doctor of a crime. On the contrary, the signature of the handwriting examination clearly removed any suspicions from him. The police were increasingly concerned with why the parents, having an official medical conclusion and the opportunity to turn to a hospital, preferred to keep the situation quiet and solve it independently. This was especially surprising considering that the family was considered quite well off and could afford good medical care. Against the background of this story, another nuance arose. Considering that Christina disappeared from public life in mid-2017, Prague's medical services should have shown at least some interest in her fate. But no official control or checking of Christina's condition by medical authorities was recorded over these years. It turned out that a person literally fell out of the sight of doctors and social services for several years, which also required separate investigation. The family's decision about isolation was made in complete secrecy. Neighbors noticed nothing unusual, and doctors took no steps to find out the condition of their patient. All this generated additional questions for the parents and Prague's medical system. At that moment, the story still remained confusing. Formally, documents confirmed the parents' version, but legally such a family decision looked extremely vulnerable. The investigation was sure that soon they would be able to uncover more details capable of turning around the understanding of this case. 3 days passed after the police first entered the Novakov apartment. The investigation had already begun to resemble a complex puzzle in which key details were missing. It was at this moment that criminalists made an unexpected discovery that could change the direction of the entire case. During a more detailed inspection of the apartment, police discovered a grey cotton glove in the ventilation shaft. At first glance, an ordinary household item that can be found in any home. But it was precisely on it that experts noticed a small, almost invisible trace of hardened epoxy resin. It was precisely this detail that turned out to be that very missing link that could connect the discovery with previous events and one of the main suspects, Christina's father, Martin Novak. The investigators quickly established that the glove completely matched in brand and model those that had previously been found in Martin's car trunk. But this was not yet everything. Chemical analysis of the resin on the glove showed that this was a specific composition used for sealing metal surfaces. This same composition had recently been bought in one of the construction stores, Košice DIY. Moreover, the police found a receipt confirming this purchase specifically by Martin Novak. The operatives immediately summoned Martin for another interrogation. This time the police had a concrete reason. They needed to find out why he might have needed epoxy resin for ventilation, especially since Martin had confidently claimed in previous meetings that he had not performed any repair work in the apartment and had not even touched the ventilation system. To all accusations and suspicions, he responded calmly, denying any involvement in this incident. According to him, he bought the epoxy resin exclusively for the garage and had not planned and could not use it either in the apartment or especially in the house ventilation. Despite the obvious inconsistency between his testimony and real facts, the investigation was not rushing to final conclusions. It was necessary to understand why someone needed to apply sealant specifically in the ventilation shaft. The first version that arose in the police was the most obvious. Someone specifically sealed the ventilation so that sounds from the bathroom would not be heard by neighbors or strangers. This was a logical and frightening hypothesis. The ventilation could indeed serve as a channel for transmitting any sounds, screams or requests for help, which the neighbor, Zuzana Kovachova, had previously mentioned. But weak points quickly appeared in the version. First, the opening of the ventilation shaft in which they found the glove was not completely closed. The resin was applied only partially and could not completely isolate sounds. And second, inspection showed that such partial blocking of ventilation could not be an effective solution for absolute soundproofing. While the operatives pondered over the new evidence, an unexpected message came from the fire inspection. Fire service experts conducted their own check of the ventilation shaft of the entire building to determine how the sealant had been applied. The inspection's conclusions completely turned the investigation picture upside down. It turned out the epoxy resin had been applied not from the Novak's apartment, but one floor below, from the neighboring apartment. This discovery cast doubt on all previous assumptions about the parents' guilt. The police encountered for the first time a version that someone third might be involved in the case, whom the investigation had not even suspected before. So far, no one could say exactly which of the neighbors had access to the shaft and why might have used the epoxy composition. But one thing became clear for certain. The glove in the ventilation was not an accident. The person who was doing work in the shaft probably lost it precisely at the moment of applying the sealant. And this person, whoever he was, could become a key witness or even a suspect. Now the police had to take a close look at the Novak family's neighbors. First of all, the operatives' attention turned again to Zuzana Kovachova, the woman who first gave testimony against Christina's father and had previously mentioned nighttime requests for help. It was her apartment that was located directly under the Novak's dwelling. If the epoxy resin was applied from there, this could shed light on the true motives of the neighbors' actions, who had not previously aroused particular suspicion. By this time, the investigation clearly understood that the case was more complex than it had initially seemed. Christina's isolation could be connected not only with her diagnosis or her parents' actions, but also with still unknown circumstances. At this stage of the investigation, no one was rushing to make unambiguous conclusions anymore. The glove with a drop of epoxy resin became a new puzzle in the chain of events, which only became more complicated with each day. And while the police tried to understand who and why could have interfered with the ventilation system, the story itself gradually went far beyond the framework of one family and turned into something much larger and darker. From the moment the glove was discovered in the ventilation shaft, the investigation began to look at the neighbors with special attention. And at the center of this attention was Zuzana Kovachova, the woman who first spoke about screams from the Novak's apartment. Until this moment, the police perceived her only as a witness, but now her role acquired a completely different shade. Zuzana Kovachova is 44 years old. A single woman, she has been living in an apartment directly under the Novak family for more than 10 years. Until 2018, she worked as a nurse in the psychoneurological department of Prague City Hospital. This became known to the investigation quite recently, when police officers checked her biography more thoroughly. Zuzana herself preferred not to speak about this fact during the first interrogations, and it was revealed only after a request to the hospital. Zuzana was dismissed from work in the summer of 2018. The formal reason was violation of subordination. Colleagues claimed that she allowed herself to interfere in the treatment process, often tried to give medical recommendations to patients, although she had no medical education. The clinic management decided not to publicize the details of her dismissal, limiting themselves to a dry formulation. After leaving the hospital, Zuzana got a job as a cleaner in a small private firm. When the police again summoned Zuzana for interrogation and asked why she had not contacted the authorities if she first heard screams from the neighbor's apartment back in 2018, the woman could not give a convincing explanation. Her answer was short and not very plausible. Allegedly, she thought it was the television working too loudly. However, such an excuse looked quite doubtful, especially considering her experience working in the psychoneurological department. After all, Zuzana could definitely distinguish a real scream from television noise. The investigators suggested that Zuzana could have unofficially consulted the Novak family, relying on her experience. This could explain both her silence and strange behavior, and even knowledge of details of what was happening in the apartment. The woman categorically denied any such contacts with neighbors. However, the operatives had already begun to doubt her sincerity. To confirm or refute the connection between Zuzana and the Novak family, the police conducted a check of her telephone calls over the past several years. The results turned out to be unexpected and opened new perspectives in the case. According to telephone billing data in the period from 2018 to 2019, 26 telephone conversations took place between Zuzana Kovachova and Martin Novak. Moreover, these calls clearly coincided in time with the period when, according to Zuzana, she first heard screams. The number of calls was unusually large, especially considering that Zuzana and Martin claimed during interrogations that they almost never communicated. What exactly the neighbors talked about remained a mystery for now. The police were not rushing to reveal the content of the conversations, but the fact remained a fact. There was a connection between them. After 2019, the calls abruptly stopped. Something had clearly changed in the neighbors' relationship, but the police did not yet understand what exactly. When asked why the contact suddenly broke off, Zuzana said only that she no longer saw the need to communicate. In her words again sounded the same uncertainty and evasiveness that accompanied her entire interrogation. The investigation decided not to officially name Zuzana a suspect for now. Her status remained open. But the operatives increasingly inclined toward the thought that the neighbor's role in this story was much deeper than it had seemed at first. Perhaps her silence over several years was not just a coincidence, but part of some larger plan, which could include at minimum silent agreement with what was happening. Parallel to these discoveries, investigators conducted a repeated questioning of other neighbors. None of them confirmed that they heard screams from the Novikov apartment. The only person constantly insisting on this fact remained Zuzana. On one hand, this could testify to her heightened attentiveness, and on the other hand, to the fact that she was deliberately drawing police attention to the neighbor family, possibly distracting from her own actions. Zuzana herself did not look agitated or concerned, despite the harshness of the interrogations. The woman was cautious in her answers, did not demonstrate aggression or panic, as if she was prepared for such a turn of events. The operatives could not help but notice this. The woman's behavior made them think that in this story everything was much more complicated than it initially seemed. The investigation had to figure out whether the calls between neighbors were simply a coincidence, personal consultations, or something more. Given the previous findings, the police were certain of only one thing. The story with the Novikov apartment was far from a family tragedy. And now, when it became clear that the neighbors were involved in it no less than the parents, the investigation was preparing to enter a completely new stage, where the center of attention might not be the Novikov family at all, but Zuzana Kovashova. To better understand Christina's story, the police again returned to the past. June 14th, 2018, approximately a year after the Novikov family made the decision to isolate her at home. It was then that psychiatrist Marek Bencho first found himself under the close attention of Prague's medical authorities. The reason was a warning issued by the medical chamber for insufficient supervision of outpatient patients. Among the patients to whom there were questions was Christina Novakova. The official inspection showed that after discharge from the clinic, Bencho continued to consult Christina remotely. Once a month, for approximately 30 minutes, he conducted video calls via Skype. This was formally permitted by the rules, but was considered non-standard practice. At that time, telemedicine was already widespread, but was always perceived only as an additional way of observation, not the main one. The inspectors could not find substantial evidence to impose serious sanctions on the doctor, however. For the future, they recommended that he more carefully keep records of his outpatient patients. The case was closed, limited only to a warning. Investigators were greatly interested in why the doctor, who knew about the seriousness of the patient's condition, preferred remote sessions instead of personal visits or referring her to an inpatient facility. After all, Christina's condition, according to her mother's testimony, was not improving. On the contrary, it was worsening each month. And nevertheless, Bencho regularly confirmed the severity of her condition precisely remotely. During questioning, the psychiatrist told police that he considered his actions completely justified. According to him, Christina's mother, Eva Novakova, assured that home isolation and constant care were more effective for her daughter than inpatient treatment. The doctor could not personally verify the contrary, since all his observations were limited to short video calls. But he claimed that he saw no reason to doubt the mother's words. Nevertheless, the investigation had another hypothesis. The police suggested that Dr. Bencho might have been receiving unofficial payment from the Novikov family for his regular remote consultations. Such suspicions arose because neither in the doctor's documents nor in the official bills for clinic services were these consultations reflected. It was difficult to verify this version directly, and at the moment it remained only one of the possible ones. While the police were figuring out the doctor's motives, another, more alarming detail unexpectedly surfaced. The forensic medical examination of the drugs that were found in Christina's bathroom showed a strange discrepancy. The antipsychotic medications that the girl had been taking over the last months, according to official data, were discontinued from production back in 2019. However, The packages discovered on site had a production date of 2021. This meant that someone continued to manufacture the drug or import it illegally. Experts emphasized that the drug could not legally be in circulation, and this fact required separate investigation. But the supply channel for these medications remained completely unclear. Dr. Marek Bencho categorically denied any involvement in purchasing or supplying the drugs. He assured that he had not prescribed them after the cessation of official production and had no idea how such medicines could have gotten to the Novikov house at all. The police were not rushing to reveal the channels for obtaining the drugs. This mystery could hide behind it something bigger than simple negligence by the doctor or family. Now the investigation understood one thing. Someone clearly maintained the Novikov family's access to prohibited medications. But who and why they did this remained unknown. An important point was that despite the obvious violation of medical ethics, there was no direct evidence of a criminal connection between Dr. Bencho and the family. The fact of the medical chamber warning was not a crime, but called into question his reputation and professionalism. Psychiatrist Marek Bencho continued to insist that his motives were always purely professional and patient care was his priority. The investigation now paid special attention to the financial side of the relationship between the doctor and Christina's mother. After all, if payment really happened in cash and bypassing the clinic, this could mean collusion that directly influenced the decision to keep Christina at home and hide her condition. Meanwhile, the police were going to request the Novikov family's financial reports and Dr. Bencho's personal bank statements to understand whether an unofficial connection existed. But the results of these checks remained to be seen later. With each new fact, the investigation became more complicated. Now, no one was certain that the decision about Christina's home isolation was made exclusively by her parents. More and more new people appeared in the case whose motives still seemed non-obvious and whose role was not fully clear. The drug examination and oddities in the doctor's behavior clearly indicated that the case had a second bottom, which the investigation had yet to uncover. The source of new medications remained a serious and unsolved mystery that could lead to completely unexpected consequences. The investigation took an unexpected turn on October 2nd, 2021. A police operation at one of the illegal drug markets in Prague led to an important discovery. Operatives confiscated 12 packages of the same antipsychotic that was previously found in Christina Novikova's bathroom. The drug seller turned out to be Igor Kovac, the husband of the Novikov family's neighbor, Zuzana Kovachova. This was the first serious connection between the Novikov family and their neighbors, extending far beyond phone calls and domestic suspicions. Igor Kovac was an inconspicuous person, practically invisible to neighbors. He worked as an ordinary loader at one of the large pharmaceutical warehouses on the outskirts of Prague. Every day, Igor got to work by bicycle, traveling about 7 kilometers each way. The investigation quickly established how the antipsychotics ended up in Kovac's hands. On surveillance camera footage made on the 11th of November 2020 on the warehouse, it was clearly visible how Igor steals several packages of exactly this medication. However, the police could not yet explain why the loader needed precisely this rare antipsychotic, which had long been officially discontinued from production. When Igor found himself in the interrogation room, he refused any explanations. His lawyer took a simple and cautious position. My client used the medication for personal consumption. The version sounded implausible, especially considering the amount of stolen medicine. Experts confirmed. The volume would have been enough for months of use in a very severe stage of disorder, but Igor had no recorded medical diagnosis requiring such medication. The investigation logically assumed that the purpose of the theft was resale on the underground market. Prague, like any other major European city, had its illegal circulation of medical preparations, especially those that were impossible to purchase officially. Police officers were certain that this was exactly where the stolen packages were headed. However, soon an event occurred that again turned the case toward the Novak family. Forensic experts carefully examined each package seized from Igor Kovac and discovered that one of them had a clear fingerprint. This fingerprint belonged to Eva Novakova, Christina's mother. Thus, for the first time, a direct physical connection was established between the neighbors and the Novak family through the stolen medication. Igor Kovac himself continued to remain silent. Zuzana Kovachova appeared surprised, even frightened during interrogations. She assured that she never knew about such actions by her husband. But the investigation was no longer certain whether to trust her words, especially after it was revealed that she had previously worked as a nurse and clearly possessed the necessary knowledge to assess the value of such medicine. The police could not yet say exactly how the package with the medication ended up in Eva Novakova's hands. Several hypotheses existed. Perhaps Christina's mother purchased the medications consciously, directly from Igor or through an intermediary, understanding that officially obtaining the medicine was no longer possible, or the package could have reached her accidentally, through someone from third parties who bought from Igor and resold medications further. Operatives thoroughly checked Eva Novakova's financial operations for the past year, but no suspicious transactions or large amounts of cash had yet been identified. Nevertheless, the investigation already understood. Christina's mother definitely played an important role in the antipsychotic supply chain. What her exact function was, buyer, intermediary, or simply accidental consumer, remained a mystery. Regarding Igor Kovac, the police also treated him cautiously. Despite the obvious crime, theft of medications from the warehouse, he looked more like a minor figure in a much larger scheme. The investigation had no grounds to believe that he planned to deliberately supply medications exclusively for the Novak family. It was quite likely that Christina's mother simply turned out to be one of many buyers on the underground market. Nevertheless, it could not be denied that the neighborhood and close relationships between the families significantly increased the probability of their close cooperation. The investigation decided to work through this line of investigation in maximum detail. The question of exactly how Eva obtained the medication remained open. Most of all, the investigation was interested in whether she knew about the illegal origin of the medicines, or whether she considered them quite legal and simply bought from a neighbor without delving into details. In any case, now she had to give clear explanations. From this moment, the focus of the investigation gradually shifted to the personality of Eva Novakova and her real role in this story. Until now, Christina's mother looked more like a victim of circumstances and family tragedy, but now her position could change dramatically. The new discovery sharply complicated the investigation and added even more questions to an already complex and confusing story. Investigators knew that this case was becoming more difficult each day, and its finale would most likely not satisfy anyone who was involved in it. On the 10th of October 2021, the police received the results of Eva Novakova's financial check. The investigation's attention was drawn to an unusual scheme of her monetary operations, which sharply differed from typical household expenses of the family. According to reports, from the beginning of 2019 up until the very moment of opening the bathroom, Eva regularly withdrew cash from her personal bank account. This happened every 2 months, always with the same amount, 400 euros. Considering the regularity and precision of the amounts, investigators immediately suspected that this money was intended for payment of some services that the woman had not previously reported to police. However, the most unusual transaction happened recently, on the 5th of August 2021, a little more than a month before police found Christina. On this day, Eva Novakova suddenly made a transfer of 1,200 euros to the bank account of Dr. Marek Bencho. The transfer was accompanied by a note consultation. This was the first and only payment conducted officially through the bank, rather than in cash, as before. Police decided to immediately summon Eva Novakova for repeated interrogation. To the question about the unusual transfer of money to the psychiatrist, Christina's mother answered quite calmly. She claimed that Dr. Bencho demanded advance payment for Christina's future hospitalization, which they supposedly planned to conduct already in autumn of this year. According to her explanation, the previous cash payments were also intended for the doctor. supposedly exactly for his regular remote consultations and recommendations. Why this time the transfer went officially rather than in cash, Eva explained simply. According to the doctor, the amount was too large to pass it personally into hands. The version itself sounded sufficiently logical. The family could indeed plan hospitalization, especially considering the situation with the COVID-19 pandemic, which could have prevented doing this earlier. Police even began to lean toward the thought that the mother could sincerely try to provide treatment for her daughter and simply found herself hostage to circumstances. However, the investigation was accustomed to checking everything thoroughly. Operatives turned to Dr. Bencho for confirmation of the mother's version. His reaction turned out to be completely unexpected. In an official letter to the doctor's lawyer, Bencho categorically denied that he had ever planned or discussed Christina's hospitalization with the family. Moreover, he stated that he had never demanded any advance payments from the Novaks at all, and the money transfer in August 2021 became a complete surprise for him. Bencho was even ready to present his bank statements to confirm that he had not received any cash payments from the Novak family before. Thus, a completely new problem arose before the investigation. Someone was clearly telling lies. Either Christina's mother, who stubbornly stood by the version with hospitalization and regular payments for consultations, or Dr. Bencho himself, who claimed the opposite and denied any agreements. Both variants looked equally convincing and simultaneously equally suspicious. The investigation checked the doctor's financial documents and so far found no contradictions in his testimony. But there remained an open question of why he did not contact police after receiving the strange transfer. Also, investigators could not understand why the mother needed to so obviously document the payment if all previous amounts had always been in the form of cash and left no banking traces. Forensic experts suggested that Eva could have thus created an official alibi in case police began checking the history of Christina's illness and treatment. Others believed that the mother was sincere in her attempts to help her daughter, and the doctor for some reason refused his words to avoid responsibility for possible violations of medical ethics. The version that the mother planned to place her daughter in a clinic and this was prevented by the pandemic looked quite reasonable. However, its truthfulness was now under great doubt. The transfer of 1,200 euros looked too planned and obvious an action, as if specifically intended to attract police attention and record some agreements. Meanwhile, investigators carefully studied the mother's phone conversations and correspondence with Dr. Bencho over the past few months. They found no clear confirmations of the hospitalization version. The mother's communication with the doctor always remained extremely brief and neutral, and nowhere was mentioned either a clinic or prepayment, or even future hospitalization. The tension between Eva Novakova and Marek Bencho became increasingly obvious. It was clear to the investigation. Either they acted in conspiracy and were now trying to shift responsibility onto each other, or one of them had lied from the beginning, pursuing their own interests. In any case, the financial connection between Christina's mother and her psychiatrist became the most important evidence in the case. It completely refuted the version previously voiced by the parents that Christina was isolated exclusively for her safety and in accordance with medical recommendations. Now investigators understood that much more complex and dark motives could lie behind the actions of the Novikov family. The finale of the investigation was rapidly approaching, and the investigation was already faced with a choice: whether to recognize what happened as a result of tragic circumstances, individual guilt of someone alone, or a joint conspiracy in which both parents and the doctor were drawn. But for now, both the police and viewers remained in ignorance about who actually controlled this story. On the 22nd of July 2022, the Prague court announced the verdict in the case of Christina Novakova. The investigation, which lasted almost a year, finally completely revealed the picture of what happened. From the very beginning, Christina's parents, Eva and Martin Novakov, sought to avoid publicity about their daughter's mental condition. For them, this was more important than medical help or even the law. It was precisely the fear that acquaintances, friends, or colleagues would learn the truth that became the starting point of the story that shocked the Czech Republic. Eva Novakova, not trusting official medicine and fearing publicity through hospitals and clinics, turned for help to her neighbor, Zuzana Kovachova. She, using her old connections in the medical environment, organized illegal supply of antipsychotic drugs through her husband, Igor Kovach, a loader at a pharmaceutical warehouse. At some point, Martin Novak decided that the situation needed more secrecy. Fearing that neighbors would begin to suspect something, he engaged in sealing the ventilation between their apartment and the Kovach apartment 1 floor below. For this, Martin used a construction hairdryer and epoxy resin, which he applied at night. The investigation found that the hairdryer accelerated the process of sealant hardening, and at night Martin could act unnoticed. Thus, he not only tried to hide any sounds that Christina might make, but also indirectly ensured the neighbors' silence. Zuzana, besides helping with drug supply, gave parents instructions on their dosage, acting as an unofficial medical consultant. Police confirmed this with phone calls that were actively conducted between Zuzana and Martin until 2019, when the couple realized that the supply scheme was already established and additional consultations were no longer required. However, the key link in this chain turned out to be Dr. Marek Bencho, Christina's official psychiatrist. He regularly signed all necessary medical documents for social services, confirming Christina's severe condition remotely. The doctor really did not know the real conditions of her stay in the apartment, but his negligence and desire to receive money for regular consultations had a direct impact on what was happening. It was precisely his remote consultations that allowed the family to avoid close attention from social services for almost 4 years. During the investigation, the version was confirmed that Eva Novakova's fingerprints found on antipsychotic packages did not appear by chance. Eva regularly passed empty packages to Igor to receive new batches of drugs in return. This exchange was part of a clearly established scheme. Police established that it was precisely the night camera of the neighboring parking lot that recorded that very hairdryer in Martin's hands. His testimony about garage repair turned out to be a lie with which he tried to divert suspicions from the real purpose of the tool. The connection between Zuzana and the parents also became clear. Her phone conversations were instruction on dosage and application of antipsychotics. The family completely trusted her advice, although Zuzana herself had no medical education. Such consultation became another reason why they did not turn to real doctors for so long. One of the drug packages produced in 2021 was the result of a controlled purchase by police on the illegal market where Igor Kovach sold medicines. It was precisely this package that became the first serious lead that allowed the investigation to uncover the entire chain of crime. The trial was tense. Martin Novak tried to shift blame onto his wife, claiming that she led the entire scheme and demonstrating to the court the bank transfer to Dr. Bencho. But at the last moment, the situation changed sharply. Zuzana Kovachova unexpectedly changed her testimony and directly in the courtroom declared that Martin had threatened her with serious consequences if she decided to reveal the truth to police earlier. These testimonies proved decisive. Now both parents looked guilty in the court's eyes and equally responsible for what happened to Christina. At the end of the trial, Eva and Martin Novakov were found guilty on all charges. The court sentenced both to the same punishment, 12 years imprisonment. Zuzana and Igor Kovach received suspended sentences for complicity and theft of medicinal drugs. Dr. Marek Bencho was found guilty of medical negligence and received 2 years suspended sentence. Gardener Jan Nowak disappeared on the morning of the 6th of May in the Monastery garden of St. Clara near Krakow. Surveillance cameras clearly recorded how he entered the garden at exactly 6:47 in the morning, but he never appeared anywhere else again. His disappearance raised many questions and suspicions, but the camera recordings that showed that Jan never left the garden territory were of particular interest, at least not officially. That morning, Jan arrived, as usual, 20 minutes before 7 to engage in regular garden work. He left his bicycle near the small gate leading to the monastery's inner courtyard and went inside, holding in his hands a large coil of rope for tying up shrubs. At 6:47, the cameras recorded his silhouette disappearing into the shadows of flower beds and garden trees. The last frame shows Jan slowly walking past the compost heap, as if examining or checking something. After that, nothing, as if he dissolved into thin air. Despite the fact that the cameras did not record Jan's exit, something was discovered quickly. Near the compost heap on the ground, fresh footprints of size 43 shoes were found, exactly the size Jan wore. Police attention was also drawn to a small detail. Near the compost heap, the grass was disturbed, as if something had been dragged across the ground quite recently. But the strangest discovery awaited police later. In the trash basket of the monastery's common kitchen, they found a torn receipt. It was a bank document evidencing a transfer to some charitable account. The recipient's name was torn off. And while experts studied its origin, another strange fact became known to the investigation. On the morning of the next day, Sister Agatha, one of the nuns, appeared at prayer with deep scratches on her left wrist. When asked about the origin of the wounds, Agatha calmly replied that she had injured herself in the garden. But this explanation did not satisfy the police, because at night she was seen there where she had no need to be. By evening of the same day, the investigation already had two suspects. The first was brother cook Lukasz, who had been in tense relations with Jan for several months. Neighbors and parishioners repeatedly heard loud arguments between them. The reason for the conflicts was unclear, but the fact of disagreements was confirmed by many witnesses. The second suspect turned out to be Sister Agatha. Despite her reputation as a calm and quiet person, Agatha was strangely often noticed in those places of the garden where even other nuns did not go. On the night of the gardener's disappearance, she was clearly spotted near the northern part of the garden, the very same where footprints and strange damage to the lawn were later found. On the evening of the 7th of May, police conducted the first inspection of the monastery premises. Special attention was paid to the personal belongings of staff and monastery inhabitants. It was in Lukasz's locker that garden gloves with dark brown-colored stains were found. The gloves were immediately sent for examination, and Lukasz was temporarily suspended from work and placed under special surveillance. Lukasz himself, answering investigation questions, was taciturn and nervous. He claimed that the stains on the gloves appeared after butchering meat. No one believed him, but there was no direct evidence against him yet. On the evening of the same day, police decided to use a service dog to search for Jan's traces on the garden territory. The German shepherd confidently followed the route of the disappeared gardener. The dog moved straight to the compost heap and suddenly froze, as if sensing something under the layer of old grass and earth. The police tensed. Flashlights illuminated the point where the dog was looking, but the officer unexpectedly gave the command to stop work and postpone further actions until morning, citing the approaching darkness and impossibility of ensuring a full inspection of the location. The morning of the 8th of May arrived. The garden was already cordoned off. The investigation was expanded, attracting additional forces from the Central Police Department of Krakow. The morning of the 9th of May began tensely. While operatives examined the monastery garden, the investigation's attention was completely absorbed by Brother Lukasz. The day before, after examination, the stains on his gloves were officially recognized as bull's blood, and it seemed this removed all suspicions from the quiet monastery cook. But now, when police expected to simply clarify details and close the question regarding Lukasz, the situation changed dramatically. Investigator Krzysztof Jaworski, who was leading the case, invited Lukasz for a repeat interrogation to finally record his testimony. The interrogation began at 9:30 in the morning. During the first 15 minutes, Lukasz behaved restrained but was clearly nervous. The investigator offered him a glass of water, but Lukasz refused, not taking his eyes off the window as if expecting to see someone on the street. At 9:48, the investigator had to urgently leave the office. He was distracted by an unexpected phone call from experts who reported new details about the financial receipt from the monastery. Just a few minutes later, when Jaworski returned to the office, the chair opposite was empty. Lukasz had disappeared, leaving only a slightly open office door. An alarm was immediately raised. Police checked the entire precinct and surrounding territory, but Lukasz was nowhere to be found. The first analysis of Lukasz's mobile phone, left in the office, showed a strange picture. 30 missed calls from an unknown number. Lukasz's phone turned out to be the simplest, an old button phone without GPS and internet, a 2020 model. Experts immediately began to establish the owner of the unknown number. Parallel to this, investigators spoke with Lukasz's roommate, brother Mateusz. Mateusz confirmed that on the night of the 6th of May, when Jan Nowak disappeared, Lukasz was indeed with him in the monastery kitchen. He did not go anywhere, prepared meat for the festive dinner, and even cut himself. This information confirmed Lukasz's alibi, but his sudden flight raised suspicions of another kind. Police returned to the question of the stains on Lukasz's gloves, having already officially excluded their involvement in Jan Nowak's case. The examination confirmed the stains belonged to animal origin. It was bull's blood, delivered together with offal early in the morning of the 6th of May for the monastery kitchen. The meat supplier from the local butcher shop confirmed this documentarily and gave testimony to the investigation. Nevertheless, this did not explain Lukasz's sudden disappearance. A cautious conclusion appeared in the police. Perhaps Lukasz panicked, afraid that he might be framed. However, this was only an assumption, not supported by facts, and the investigation could not base final conclusions on it. After Lukasz's disappearance, a new version appeared in the police, no longer directly connected to gardener Nowak. Now the focus of attention was directed to the unknown calls to Lukasz's phone. The investigation began to consider the possibility that the monastery cook simply became frightened of whoever was persistently trying to reach him all these days. Operatives developed a version. Lukasz disappeared, fearing for his safety, and not because of direct guilt. But there was no proof of this version yet. By evening of the same day, police received an official printout of Lukasz's phone calls. The number from which 30 calls came was registered to a woman living directly in the monastery of St. Clara. The coincidence seemed strange, considering the strict monastery rules and the complete absence of personal phones among most nuns. Investigator Jaworski ordered to urgently establish the identity and interrogate the owner of the number. Deciphering of calls was scheduled for the next day. The investigation decides to shift attention inside the monastery and study more deeply the internal connections of the monastic community. By the morning of the 10th of May, the investigation moved its focus inside the monastery. Police, having received preliminary expert conclusions, began work with accounting documents, carefully studying the community's financial flows. Among papers found in the office of Sister Agatha, the monastery's economist, a serious discrepancy was revealed. About 12,000 zloty allocated for charitable purposes simply disappeared from the accounting books. The money was processed through a series of bank receipts in the name of the charitable organization Children's Aid Fund. However, the signature on these documents raised doubts among forensic experts. On one of the receipts, forensic experts clearly identified the signature of gardener Jan Nowak, who had disappeared 4 days earlier. The signature looked natural and familiar, but after more detailed verification proved to be a skillful forgery. Experts unanimously confirmed the gardener himself had not signed these papers. The investigation quickly established that the bank transfer receipt found earlier in the wastebasket of the monastery kitchen completely matched in number and date with one of the receipts discovered in the accounting department. Thus, it was confirmed that someone had specifically tried to hide traces of the forgery by destroying important documents. Police began to clarify who exactly had access to the foundation seal and could conduct financial operations on behalf of the monastery. The abbess officially stated that only 3 people had access to the seal: herself, Sister Agatha, the monastery's economist, and Sister Zofia, a nun in charge of the pharmacy and household affairs. Both of the latter had the right to make payments and conduct financial affairs, while the abbess personally kept the seal in her office and handed it over strictly upon request. Police immediately asked the abbess a key question: Which of the listed persons had used the foundation's seal most often in recent weeks? The abbess's answer was specific and brief. Sister Agatha, the monastery's economist, requested the seal more often than others, as she regularly conducted financial operations and made calculations for charitable projects. Zofia used the seal much less frequently, exclusively in cases of purchasing medications and household items. The testimony was recorded by investigator Jaworski, and Sister Agatha was temporarily removed from her duties, with an official review of all her reports and documents scheduled for the next day. Meanwhile, temporary suspicions fell on the abbess herself. The investigation noted that she was the main holder of the signature and seal and could potentially authorize transfers. The abbess was called for a separate conversation where she calmly provided a detailed alibi for May 4th, the day the last transfer was made. At that time, she was conducting a lecture for parishioners at the City Catholic Center, confirmed by testimonies of about 30 people. Investigator Jaworski decided to double-check the testimony. Police requested recordings from the bank's surveillance camera where the suspicious transfer was made. Police obtained a video recording from the bank's lobby camera which captured a woman in a grey coat conducting the operation on May 4th at 11:23 in the morning. Experts were immediately able to determine the woman's height quite accurately, about 165 centimeters. At this moment, suspicions regarding the monastery's abbess were finally lifted. Her height was significantly taller, 178 centimeters, which completely excluded her participation in this episode. The abbess was immediately cleared of suspicion, and the investigation's focus definitively shifted to the two other women who had access to the seal, Sister Agatha and Sister Zofia. The investigation immediately switched to studying the personalities of Sisters Agatha and Zofia, beginning preparation for their detailed questioning. The early morning of May 12th was cool and cloudy. The investigative team arrived again at the monastery garden of St. Clara. This time, police received official permission for a deeper examination of the garden territory, particularly the area near the compost pile, where a service dog had shown unusual interest several days ago. This time, dog handlers again brought in a search dog. The dog almost immediately showed restlessness, beginning to dig soil at the base of the compost pile. Police carefully began excavations. At approximately 40 centimeters depth, a worn work jacket was discovered. It was carefully extracted from the ground, packaged, and sent for immediate examination. The first on-site examination of the jacket yielded alarming results. The fabric was riddled with numerous small puncture damages, and on the inner pocket brand buttons were clearly distinguishable, which undoubtedly belonged to gardener Jan Novak's jacket. Investigators understood that now they were definitely dealing not simply with a person's disappearance, but with a serious crime. On the same day, a new witness appeared. Sister Anna, a young novice who had quite recently joined the monastery. Until this moment, Anna had not given testimony. However, now she decided to approach police herself. According to her words, on the night of May 5th to 6th, when gardener Jan disappeared, she woke from an anxious dream and approached the window. The girl clearly saw a weak flashlight in the area of the compost pile. This was approximately between 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the morning. Investigator Krzysztof Jaworski carefully listened to the witness and asked whether she could make out who was holding the flashlight. Anna answered with uncertainty that the silhouette was unclear, but she heard the voice well, and it was clearly a woman's voice. The girl could not confidently name a name, but was certain that one of the nuns was near the compost precisely that night. The investigation immediately tried to clarify the situation with the flashlight. To the question of who in the monastery had access to a portable flashlight, novice Anna said that she had seen it before only with Sister Agatha, the monastery's economist, who sometimes went to check the utility rooms in the evenings. But the girl could not firmly assert whether it was precisely Agatha that night. The voice seemed familiar to her, but she could not give specifics. As a result of this uncertain testimony, Sister Agatha was again called for clarification, However, she continued to deny any nighttime movements, stating that she never used a flashlight outside the monastery building. During preliminary analysis, investigators wondered whether the jacket's discovery could be a deliberately planted piece of evidence intended to distract attention from the real crime scene. The jacket was too obviously buried at shallow depth, and this seemed suspicious to investigators. No other objects were found at the site except the jacket itself, which strengthened doubts. The investigation could not yet confirm or refute this theory. In the second half of the day, investigators decided to use a metal detector. The instrument unexpectedly gave a clear signal, indicating a metallic object hidden under a deeper layer of soil at the base of the compost pile. The head of the investigative team ordered temporarily stopping excavations and waiting to receive an official warrant for full exhumation, since this could become a key stage of the investigation, requiring compliance with all formalities. For the morning of the next day, May 13th, a full exhumation of the site was scheduled. The forensic medical examiner, criminalists, and prosecutor received instructions to arrive at the scene precisely at 7 o'clock in the morning to begin thorough examination. On the morning of May 13th, 2024, the investigative team finally received a warrant permitting full exhumation in the monastery garden. Excavations began precisely at 7 o'clock in the morning and continued for 3 hours. The forensic medical examiner and criminalists carefully extracted from under the compost pile remains that were identified as belonging to gardener Jan Novak. Forensic examination confirmed the time of death, May 6th, approximately at 8:15 in the evening. The nature of the injuries testified that the crime was committed using garden shears. Stab cut wounds clearly indicated the tool that was later found in the monastery shed. Experts used luminol, which revealed carefully clean traces of Novak's blood on the shears. The investigation rapidly approached its conclusion after forensic specialists established that Sister Agatha had taken her shoes to the dry cleaner on May 7th. Soil traces from her shoes completely matched samples of earth from the compost pile. Following this, Sister Zofia's fingerprints were identified on the stretcher that was used to move Jan's remains during the night from the 6th to the 7th of May. Further events developed quickly. In Sister Agatha's cell, during an official search, investigators discovered accounting documents about thefts of fund money. They were located in a hiding place equipped in a drawer with a double bottom. At the same time, a repeated check of bank video recordings confirmed that it was precisely Sister Zofia, 165 centimeters tall, who was withdrawing money using forged receipts on May 4th. Zofia, having come under serious suspicion, revealed another important fact. It was she who persistently called Lukasz, the brother cook, trying to convince him to remain silent about the conflict that occurred in the monastery kitchen between the gardener and Agatha shortly before the crime. Frightened by the pressure, Lukasz fled and temporarily hid. It was confirmed that the gardener's jacket found earlier was thrown away precisely by Agatha. The investigation closed the false trail, establishing that the item was an attempt to divert police attention from the compost pile and buy time. The trial began only in summer 2025 and caused enormous public interest. On the day of the decisive hearing, September 15th, dozens of journalists and local residents were present in the hall of Krakow's district court. In the final hearings, Agatha desperately tried to shift blame onto Sister Zofia, claiming that she was the initiator of the thefts and completely controlled her actions. In response, Zofia presented correspondence to the court from which it became clear that it was precisely Agatha who insisted on a personal conversation with the gardener on the evening of May 6th, clearly fearing that he would inform the police about the financial machinations. The gardener, as became clear from documents, had previously accidentally discovered evidence of thefts and intended to report to the monastery abbess. The judge harshly interrupted the mutual accusations of the nuns and emphasized that the evidence points to equal responsibility of both women. The court announced the final verdict. Sisters Agatha and Zofia are recognized as accomplices in a serious crime and sentenced to 18 years of imprisonment each. The case was officially closed. However, despite exhaustive evidence, one detail remained under the classification of uncertainty. The investigation could not definitively establish whether the murder of gardener Jan Novak was planned in advance by the nuns, or whether it was a tragic accident, consequence of a sudden conflict.